was a larrikin, a lair, an anarchist. He hated the police and the rich. He was, in a word, Australian. And they loved him because he was one of them. Hi, I'm Donn Harley and welcome to The View from Here. Tonight's film is called Strike Me Lucky. It celebrates an Australian legend, the comedian Mo, who in his other life was called Rene, and in his other life, Harry van der Sluice. I'm just a common working man, and very few working men are as common as me, declared Mo. Mo kept this nation laughing through the turmoil of 2 wars and the Depression. His stage face is instantly recognised today, 40 years after his death, and his memory lives on through, amongst other things, the annual Mo Awards. This film preserves for us a great heritage, not just of a quirky and lovable man adored by generations of Australians, but also a humour whose innocence and, I guess, dagginess has gone forever. So here's Strike Me Lucky.
I think it's generally agreed that Mo was the ultimate comic. He was a larrikin.
He was a lair, he was an anarchist, and this is what people wanted.
Because he was a clown, as well as being the great comedian, the great genius of comedy.
He was part of their lives. He was probably, one of the most famous Australians ever.
Rene is a very important part of Australian Jewish history, but its meaning eludes me.
Oh, strike me lucky, another insect! Mr. Ashwood, have you got a quid on you can learn to horrible Herbie?
Oh, Miss Hecky, is Herbie short of sugar?
No, he's full of soda water. Squirt?
Do you want to buy that magazine?
No, thanks. I've just read it. Well, to tell you the truth, I was in ladies' underwear.
And how was the business?
Too scared to... It's a put-up job.
What is?
Wallpaper. So that's the kind of woman you are, eh? It seems a very infinitesimal thing to do. Bringing me here, wasting my superfluous time in the manner which you've done. It doesn't seem to fit your characteristic charm at all. With those few remarks, madam, I shall perspire and go. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Mo. That's about all we have time for from you today.
This is a great, grand old theatre. It reminds me of the theatre I worked with Dad in Roy Mo in Adelaide. One of my greatest thrills was when the fan dancer was on, and the fan dancer knew I was up with the electrician in the box up there, and every time she turned the fan around, I could see the lot, and she was more embarrassed than I was, but I was about 12 years of age. But that's where I remember Dad mainly, in backstage of the theatre.
I was very scared of beards as a little girl. I didn't know anyone with beards, but whenever I came across one, it was really backing off and hanging onto your father's trouser leg, And I saw this man on stage, and of course the clownish white makeup and the cork and the sweat under the lights, and I could smell this delicious smell of grease paint, which is the biggest turn on for me ever in terms of a perfume. And it was so exciting, but this strange sense of like an animal roaring almost. It was something I'd never heard before in my life. These waves were coming across to this man, and I couldn't see on the side angle exactly what he was doing and why, but I knew, and I realised they were laughing, but it was like a roar of an animal. You know?
My first memory of Roy Rene was when my father took me at about the age of about 7 or 8, just up the road here at the Majestic Theatre. And Connors and Paul had vaudeville show, weekly change vaudeville. And I saw Roy Rene for the first time. And I was absolutely dumbstruck. You know, the child would love him because he was a clown, as well as being the great comedian, the great genius of comedy with, you know, sketches and adult themes and so forth. There was the clown about him that children just adored, and I, as a child, just fell in love with him immediately. I thought, my God, he's magnificent.
I can remember it in the form of snapshots. So the next minute, this man was bending down to me, and where I'd been frightened, suddenly I saw these beautiful, beautiful dark eyes, and his head was always on side, and he'd bent down, got down to the level of me as a 3-year-old, and he said, "Did your mama make that dress for you? That's the prettiest dress I've ever seen." And he said it with such sincerity that I didn't feel that he was one of these beings from another world, these people with a loud voice and things. Suddenly he was just talking to me alone. And I can remember that so distinctly. I think I loved him right from that minute.
You needn't get the wind up. I'm as harmless as a cat. And you and me ain't going to have a row. But I just got kind of lonely. I thought I'd like to have a chat.
My father, Roy Rene Moe, was born in Adelaide, South Australia, in Hindley Street, where the Theatre Royal was. And it's no longer there, I believe. His mother and father, his father was a Dutch Jew, his mother was an English Jewess, and they came out to Australia and settled in Adelaide, and they had a family of 4 girls and 3 sons, including Dad. So it was 7 in the family all together. Well, I know Dad's early days had a tendency for show business in those days because he used to set up backyard circuses.
He was stage struck and used to have concerts in the backyard and things like that. But he was used to put cork on them with the black face.
Of course, Dad was the producer and, of course, the star. So he used to finish the show with a big lion taming act where he used to get all the cats from the local district and have them as lions and tigers. The family moved to Melbourne, and that's when Dad really got into show business, or tried to get into show business. He'd go in for the trials, and my grandfather, whom I never met, because he had long gone before I was born, he'd pay people to go and heckle Dad, so to discourage him from show business. In fact, they get them to throw pennies at the stage, which was a great insult for any performer.
His brothers wanted him to be a bookmaker because they were both bookmakers.
Albert in Sydney, he was quite a showman. He would take bets as they were turning into the straight and lose all his money.
When he was younger, he was a voice soprano. And when the voice broke, I think it was somebody in New Zealand said to him, "We can't call you Boy Roy now, you're getting too old and your voice is broken, so we've got to get a new name for you." And he said, "I suggest a name, Roy Rene." That's after a very famous French comedian. So if you ever anything as good as him, it'll be a pretty good name. Well, of course, Roy never called himself Rene. He always called himself Roy Rene.
In Aigues, in France, there is a Roy Rene Boulevard there, I think. And there's a Roy Rene Hotel. It's in the south in the province. And people come back and say, they've named a street after Roy Rene. It must have been the Australian soldiers over there during World War I. They must have had a big influence on this. But, not quite that.
Always called him Mr. Rene. He never asked me to call him anything else.
I said his name should have been Roy Bloody Rene.
Roy was sitting in his dressing room at the Princess in Sydney one night, and Bill Sadler, he was a vaudeville man that had been around Sydney for years, and he was the manager of the Princess, and they're sitting talking. So Roy said, he said, I should have another name, don't you think, Bill? So Bill said yes. He said, Roy was putting his makeup on. He used to work with a sort of peculiar moustache, his nose. So Bill Sadler said, well, he said, you're working Jewish, why don't you use the name of Mo? Mo, he said. And Roy said, yes, that'll do me, Mo. And he said, you got a good team, he said, with Nat Phillips, he's Stiffy. Make yourselves Stiffy and Mo, he said, and you're well team. And it was as simple as that, how Mo got his name.
Hello, Mo. Hello, Stiffy. Would you like a eucalyptus baby? A eucalyptus baby like a you? Yes, I'd like a eucalyptus baby, providing that it's not a Jew. Would you want a eucalyptus baby? You never know what it might do. If you nurse a eucalyptus baby, then I'd go out and work for you. Maybe he'll cry.
Well, I believe the reason that Roy Rene's memory keeps alive like it does is because of his character. He was an unforgettable character, a very strong, positive character. Every movement, every line was done with strength of character. And that character was funny. And it was funny from the very first day he did it till the last day he did it. And there was something about it that the Australian public liked.
He was extraordinarily successful in adapting his work over the years. He started off in the old minstrel shows. He worked as a solo act. He worked as a double act with Nat Clifford. He worked as a double act with a number of other comedians. He worked in a straight play with Harry Green, Give and Take. He's successful at all of these. He took his work to the screen, didn't quite work out on screen. His one film didn't really convey what Mo was about. I think he missed the audience. But he shone again in radio. He was just ubiquitous on radio for years and years and years. And he reached, of course, in one night on radio, probably the same audience that he'd reached in his whole career working at the Tivoli.
Now, we found that very hard to really believe that when you've been a performer from the age of 11 or 12, 13, till the late 60s, that in one night on an air media, radio, that you can reach more people than a lifetime in the theatre. But this was true. And what a way to reach a new generation, which is what he did. And Hoyt's even told us that this little 8-minute comedy sequence, Mackaki Mansion, was affecting their attendances at the movies on a Tuesday night.
Roy Rene had been making them laugh right through the post-World War I era, and especially through the Depression. He was there with them. He was battling. He was getting sacked. On all the sketches, he represented Australians that were battling, and he made them laugh and take their minds off the fact that they didn't have the rent, they didn't have the job, and what was coming tomorrow. And then right through World War II. So he was part of their lives. He was probably, one of the most famous Australians ever. I can remember Dad showing me an envelope that somebody sent from New Zealand, and it just had Roy's profile. No name, nothing was delivered.
His place in the hearts of the Australian public, especially the theatre-going public in the 20s, 30s and 40s, was fantastic. And one of the things that he could do that no other performer I've ever seen in my whole life could do, and I've never heard of anyone anywhere in the world, and what he used to do was, when he was about to come on, he would just stick his face around the proscenium arch, round the edge of it, and the whole place would go up. And it wasn't just applause, it was a roar. And it was a roar of anticipation, of good times, you know, and a bit of sauce, you know. Whoopee!
There was a skit on the Martin McCoys. The mountaineers, the mountain people used to fight each other, and it was a big sketch. It was took the whole stage, and there was a lot of people with him, and one fellow was running from a barrel of apples to a barrel of nuts. And the fellow next to him said, he's by the apples, he's by the nuts, he's by the apples, he's by the nuts, and Mike, and then Mo would fire the shotgun. He said, you get him in the apples? No, I got him by the nuts.
Stiffy comes out and says, comes out to the audience and says, hi, I'm Stiffy, I've got a Mo. Then he points and Mo comes out and says, I'm Mo, I've got a cold. And they were underway.
He was a lair, he was an anarchist, and this is what people wanted.
The Australian larrikin. That's right. That's why all the people identified with him, because he was one of them.
You agreed with everything he said because of this streak of the anarchy which used to emerge from all of his stuff. That he hated police, he hated rich people.
Now, I'll give you an example of a gag he did, and I thought, well, now, if anything identifies him with the Australian working man, it'd have to be this. Here we go. Hey, Dad, the landlord's been around again asking for the rent. Oh, has he? Has he? Well, he's need to see the landlord doesn't know how I pay my bills. I get all my bills and put them in the hat. I pick out 3 and pay them. And if I have any more trouble from the landlord, next week he won't even go in the hat. Now, I thought, isn't that a ripper? Because every struggling working man had to pay the rent would feel, and that gives them the power back over the landlord. I think it was a ripper of a gag.
I sincerely hope that you had a good look around at Bondi and noticed some of the new structures down there.
Notice them? I could hardly take my eyes off them.
I know. Some of them are architectural miracles.
Yes, they're little beauties, all right.
In those days, there'd be hundreds of vaudeville acts around each town. People can't imagine it today. There'd be hundreds of acts, because the theatre, when I came into it in Melbourne in 1923-24, there on Saturday night you could see about 9 or 10 different shows, 10 theatres going. It was amazing.
He used to tell me, he said we used to pack them out 6 nights a week, 2 matinees, standing room only. Fantastic.
I mean, the first dirty joke I heard at school was about Stiffy and Mo. And Roy had never done the sketch. But instead of Pat and Mick, you'd put Stiffy and Mo, because Roy was supposed to have done these very, very tasteless jokes. And they were never done. And you know, and so it spread.
Nat Phillips used to write letters to the editor of the Herald, Sydney Morning Herald, and criticise the show. He would write a letter and say, I've just seen the show at the Tivoli. It's absolutely disgusting. I wouldn't take my wife or my mother to see this show. The police should do something about banning this sort of filth in entertainment. Signed, Disgusted Viewer, you see? And then that used to write him down, because he knew nothing would drag him in faster than going to see something that you're not supposed to see.
Well, anything that came out that was rude, they said Stiffy and Mo did that, but it was not so. They were not allowed to do it. They could only have a limited number of things they could say, goddamn and hell.
But there wouldn't be 4-letter words in them, and it was innuendo. It was in your mind. So when people say that Roy told really filthy material, it was the leer, and it was the innuendo, and it was the oh, and the reaction, and it was absolutely in your mind. There would be probably a few physical things, but nothing compared with what the legend has built on, that Roy Rene was absolutely a filthy comedian.
And he was dirty. He had a dirty mind. He told filthy jokes, and he did spit. You could almost feel and smell sort of sweat and dirt in this character. And I think perhaps he performed that quite interesting function, that he allowed people to laugh at something where they weren't, as grown-ups, really supposed to laugh at. Or, I mean, the child in one. The child who likes playing around with mud pies and dirt. That's my view. There'll be many other views.
I don't think children are innocent. I think children have the most wonderful vulgar streak in the whole world. When I say childlike, I mean a kind of innocence. But look how children laugh at dirty jokes and that kind of kid. Very cheeky, very naughty, but no malice.
Nat Phillips even organised coppers to turn up at the performance. The idea being that the coppers would race on stage and arrest them if they said anything untoward, you see. Well, all this sort of promotion worked wonders for them. And an interesting thing about it is that Nat Phillips used to go to the hotel near the Tivoli, and at the bar, with his circle of admirers and friends, would tell them about the sketches that he was going to do in the next show. And they're pure filth. And the interesting thing about it is that we're talking about 1919, 1920, 21, 22, 23, those years. And the stories that Nat Phillips said he was going to produce are still circulating. And one night, out the front of the theatre, this old fella came up to Mo and said, "Oh," he said, "I saw you do that thing at the Tivoli about the K and the F on the blackboard. It's the funniest thing I ever saw." And he said, "Yes, pal, yes, pal, yes, pal."
Mo was the professor and Stiffy was the student. And Mo would write an F on the blackboard and say, "Tell me, son, what's that?"
He'd say, "That's a K." And he'd say, "No, it's an F." And he'd say, "No, it's a K."
God strike me blue. Every time I put an F-U-C-K.
So when he went away, I said, "Did you ever actually do that F and K gag on it?" He said, "No, you couldn't do that. I wouldn't do it. Of course not." But he said, "Never argue with a mug."
And I got to tell you something. When people think about how many times you've been in an argument with somebody, and halfway through the argument you're saying to yourself, even if I win this argument, I'm not going to win anything here. It's not going to mean anything to me. And I adopted that as a philosophy from that time and all the years I've lived in Australia. And I'll tell you what, never argue with a mug will do you really well if you want to adopt it.
You wouldn't know me, but I've been in the show every night for a week, and I wanted to come down and make your acquaintance. I know it's very infantile of me to come down like this without being produced in the proper manner, but I've admired you from the front, and I want to meet you personally in the flesh. Of course, Miss Gal, I don't belong to the city. I'm a boy from the bush. I come from Bandywallop. Well, not exactly Bandywallop. I live 15 miles on the outskirts of Bandywallop. I'm a shepherd. I look after the sheep.
Oh, that's nice.
And the first contact with them, I did a little toe dance. I was a little solo dancer at 4 years of age, if you please. And as I came down the stairs, Mo would turn to Stiffy and he'd say, "Look what I got in my Christmas stocking." And that was the first time I'd ever seen him, really. And after that, he became, with his wife, very fond of me, and I just called them Uncle Roy and Auntie Dolly. That's how I knew them. And then they'd take me away for the weekend. They just loved to have me. They didn't have any children. And take me for a picnic, etc. on weekends.
The subject of his first wife did not come up very often. But it did come up.
And they'd take me after the show on Saturday night. They'd have me all day Sunday, and they'd bring me back for the matinee on the Monday.
Sometimes he used to give me tiny little lectures on not getting married too early in life and things like that.
She was very petite. She had black hair, and she was very nice to me, you know, and they were only newly married then. They hadn't been married very long. And they were both very fond of me, and I grew very fond of them.
Well, once a month, he used to have to pay his alimony check to his first wife. And he used to come into the office and get one of the girls there to type a letter to go with the check. And one day he was dictating the letter, and he said, May the 1st, 25 quid. May the 8th, 25 quid. May the 15th, 25 quid. May she drop bloody dead, 25 quid. I didn't like feeding chaff to a dead horse.
I think he sort of took me around and making out I was his daughter, really, you know, because I was a little chubby little thing, you know, lots of curls.
When he's married to Sadie, he made a great success of that, and he was very pleased with her, and he was as happy as he could possibly be with her. And wasn't afraid to tell us. He didn't used to eat in restaurants very much. He liked to eat at home, where the food is cooked with love.
And then the time came, well, I was still under contract to Fuller's, and they didn't know what they were going to do with me. So they finally thought we'll put her with Stiffy and Mo. At the time, I was outraged. I thought it was terrible because of their reputation. But I finished up marrying the boss.
I wasn't so conscious of Dad being famous because we had a normal home life. We had a home at Kensington in Cottenham Avenue. It was I suppose a modest home, a lovely home. Dad idolised his home and his family. I mean, he couldn't get away from the theatre quick enough to go home to Kensington.
He'd always told my father that every time he turned into his street, he would say under his breath, Paradise Place. So I had in my mind this place was going to be a palace. And when we got there, it was a nice, self-contained little brick house, very much like every other house in the street.
Well, this is where I used to live 27 years ago, actually, to be exact. And here we go.
Be it ever so humble, there's no place like home.
You see, I was a Roman Catholic marrying a Jew. And the only person that would marry us was a Presbyterian minister. A bit complicated. And that happened at about 11:30 at night, after the show.
He was very proud of being Jewish, and so am I. But my mother was she was a Catholic, and she converted to Judaism, oh gosh, I think when she got married, or just after she got married.
And I thought it was a good thing for them to come up in their father's religion, which they did. They both went through thoroughly. My daughter was confirmed, and my boy was bar mitzvah. Roy wasn't religious at all. And it wasn't through his influence, it was my own wish.
Mo didn't know anything about Judaism. His theme song is a very popular Yiddish song, Bride and Groom Mazel Tov, Chassan Kala Mazel Tov. And that probably was the only Jewish piece of music that Mo knew. And he used it as his theme, and of course spoilt many a wedding, I would think, by the same use of that theme.
You know that song, da 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 da. Well, You know, there's a thing, Jewish people sing it, da-da-da-da-da-da, mazel tov, which means good luck, you know. And every time I hear that, and that was, of course, was the identification thing with him, was part of his Jewish heritage as well, you know. So this thing really may have gone deeper into classics than people really realize. You know, this might be Shylock, or who's the guy in Oliver? I can't remember his name.
He's tapped into very profound, deep roots of the stage portrayal of the Jew, which goes back, of course, to Shylock and the Duchess of Malfi, and right into English history of Jews. On the other hand, people loved him. And Australian Jews loved him. I can remember members of the older generation thinking that he was the best thing that ever happened, queuing up to go to the Tivoli.
Roy exemplified the feeling of the era, you know. It was funny. So he was being Jewish funny. But I heard a lot of the stuff they did, and some of it didn't have anything to do with any of that, you know. It was just the character.
Yes, I think there was a big difference between people brought up in Australia and who were sort of ordinary middle-class Jews and the leadership of the Australian Jewish community that kept a very stiff-lipped silence about Mo. I've been through the Jewish papers, which are very extensive, the newspapers of the whole of the 20th century, and Mo never gets mentioned. There's a total silence about him.
After 8 months in Hollywood, it's really wonderful to be back in Australia. However, I hope what I have learned will be of material assistance to our friend Mo, when in a few weeks' time, Cinesound will start work on his first picture, which is to be called, what's it to be called?
Strike Me Lucky.
Sam, be careful. Somebody will trip over your foot.
That's my crook leg.
I thought they were both crook.
Strike Me Lucky is quite a little-known film. I mean, it's not seen very often. And there was an invitation to celebrate part of the centenary of 100 years of cinema. And the film was selected to be screened at this beautiful cinema, the Orpheum in Cremorne in North Sydney. And I went not really knowing very much about the film. I looked it up in one or two of the sort of relevant books before I went and realised that Roy Rene was an important character in sort of cultural, social history, perhaps, of Australia. This was his one film, which made me curious. So I went along to see it. But unlike most of the audience, I didn't fall about laughing every time he opened his mouth or came on screen. And actually, I was really rather angry when I saw Strike Me Lucky.
What now? What? I accept your apology. I've seen you before. Indeed?
No, in a pork butcher's window with a lemon in your mouth.
Cut it out. Don't bring sectarianism into it. Sectarianism.
And it wasn't just a funny Jewish man sending up certain notions of what it was to be Jewish. I thought this looks like virulent anti-Semitism that actually taps upon some very long-held fears, Gentile fears and hatreds of the Jewish person.
Hey, listen, why don't you come back and do that again?
Nazism was very much on the agenda in Europe at the time. Anti-Semitism was known about. And here was a film that made me angry because I thought here's a representation of the Jew which is absolutely full of hatred. I think of hatred, and that made me very angry. This film, Strike Me Lucky, was made in 1933. National Socialism, Nazism, was very much part of the world agenda. And what struck me as being very curious was it was as if Ken G. Hall, the filmmakers Australia, were unaware of this. The original working title for this film, for instance, was swastikas for luck.
Well, this particular seat brings back a lot of memories, actually, because it was on it that we sat Mo to make a scene from Strike Me Lucky. Oh, must have been 31, 32 years ago. We sat him here because we wanted to locate Bondi over there, because it's such a beautiful shot of Bondi. But from here, we were going to lead Mo into becoming a lifesaver among the Bondi boys.
Well, what do you want? I really want to become a lifesaver with wonderful physique. You don't want to go any further than me, boy, look.
I'm sorry, old man, that's a municipal affair. You'll have to see the mayor.
The mayor is he there?
Two very common myths, they go back to medieval times, about the Jewish male. One is that the Jewish male is actually rather effeminate or even feminine, that he lost blood, not only by menstruation, but obviously during circumcision. He wears a sort of little girl-type swimming costume in Bondi Beach when he's trying to prove himself to be a strong Bondi surfy, lifesaver. And he doesn't live up to that kind of male image of what the good white Australian does. And then there's another myth, I think, that the film explores, not very deeply, but touches upon, perhaps would be more accurate, which is the notion of the blood libel. Now, this was a myth that the Jew stole, kidnapped white little babies, Christian babies, of course, and used them to take their blood, actually because they menstruated and because they needed white Christian blood of a child to restore them in some way. Now, both those things are lurking around in the story, in the plot of Strike Me Lucky. And whether or not the director, the writers, whether or not Kenji Hall was aware of that, it seems to me extraordinary that somebody in 1930s didn't know what was going on.
Roy would be more concerned with what was happening to show business than he would be what was happening elsewhere. I mean, he lived and breathed and everything was around show business. So if the theatres were being filled, that would be great. If they weren't being filled, that would be bad.
He was a big boy, really, He didn't care about what was going on in the world very much. You could never sit down and have a conversation about the present government or the international scene or something like that, really. If you did, he'd probably pass it all over and get on to theatre. He'd always talk about theatre with Roy, about something or other.
Maybe we're reading far more into the character of Rene than is justified. But considering his success, I think it's well worthwhile investigating.
Strike Me Lucky broke his heart because I was not in the show with him in the making of the film. And he'd come home at night and he'd relate to me about a scene. He'd say, oh, we did a scene so-and-so, and tell me the scene. And when we went to see the screening of it, they had left half of the stuff on the cutting floor. They chopped it about one man. Now I can't think of his name. You'd know. He tried to do everything.
I was delighted to have a chance to make a film with Mo, but it didn't turn out as well as we'd all hoped. It wasn't Mo's fault. He was still a great comedian, although essentially he was a theatre man. He lived, he worked on an audience, and he was a little at sea in a film studio with no audience. I think the great fault with the film was the story, and basically my fault, for I had at that time, and still have, an overdeveloped sense of the ridiculous.
Look, Mr. Lowensteiler, I'm only a boy. A poor and sophisticated lad who's trying to do his best. Oh.
This is a part coming
No,
Lovely.
Get out and take that brat with you.
Very well, Mr. Lowenstein. I'll go, but remember, it's not the coat that makes a man.
What is it?
The trousers.
Get out of my shop.
Very well, Mr. Lowenstein. But there's one thing I'd like to say to you before I go.
What is it?
I never wish to work for a Greek again.
Never worked for a Greek again.
Sam, come on.
Hold on. Harry,
I'll buy you a rubber walking
No,
stick.
you won't.
It's a cruel world we live in, full of sadness and with woe, trials and tribulations meet us everywhere we go. Life is just full of disappointment, and everything looks glum.
So brethren, keep your faith up. We know that was to come.
We came here to find the seat where Ken Hall sat 30 years ago and where Roy Rene sat 30 years before that. And what we found is this slab, the seat's been broken, it's gone. I feel kind of like I'm visiting the gravesite of Roy Rene, Ken Hall, and a whole era of Australian comedy. I've got a lot of really clear memories of Roy Rene and Mo and that whole radio era. It seems to me to have been a very rich era when we had a great amount of comedy on radio. But I remember particularly listening to Mo and to Mackaki Mansions and Cop This Young Harry and the story that he always started to tell and never finished, The Barmaid and the Butcher. I think something happened to Australian radio comedy when television arrived in '56. Somehow I think radio comedy hit a wall. In fact, for a while, Australian comedy hit a wall. We had this wealth of radio talent, the kind of royal family of radio comedy. Most of the people, like Roy Rene, came from a background of the theatre, of vaudeville and burlesque and that kind of comedy, at the Tivoli, particularly in places like Sydney. And they made the transition to radio very smoothly. They became radio stars, in fact, huge radio stars. I think people don't realise today that they were stars of a dimension that even few television personalities are today. And they made that transition very well, and I feel Roy Rene would have been just as big a star on television as he was on radio. One of the things that Roy Rene had was a terrific ability to make comedy for ordinary Australians. He touched ordinary people around the country with a kind of comedy that spoke to Australians as Australian comedy. I think it's interesting every now and then when we go through a kind of debate, when we try and work out what being Australian means, that there have been various parts of our history or points in our history when we knew what it meant. And I think during that radio era, we had every confidence in what we were. And Roy Rene was part of that, part of what we were.
But a lot of people said, oh, well, he'll never do any good in radio because of that lisp. But Roy accentuated that. He didn't lisp like that. That was his character.
They brought all the knockers out, and people say, he can't be funny without being filthy. And some people say, oh, he's harder to understand than Donald Duck, you see? And there were plenty of people against him.
The lisp and the splutter and everything was very heavy for radio, and he tended to lose some of his own best lines.
Radio, it's all got to be verbal, and I must understand you. So he suggested to Roy Rene that he get the editorial of the Sydney Morning Herald and read it aloud every day and listen to himself to make sure that every word was properly enunciated and they could understand everything he said.
There were several generations of Australia that followed his career that knew every inflection, every mannerism, that when they listened to radio, they had a totally vivid image of Roy Rene, Mo, in their minds. And because radio demands imagination, they knew every trick in the book that he would be pulling while he was doing a radio show.
Remember, your listeners at home are the ones we're aiming at, not the audience in front of you. And he did this, but every now and again he couldn't resist temptation. We had a situation with a sketch with a bird cage in it, and Lashford said to him, now, Mo, put your hand in there and get hold of the canary. He said, very well, I'll just open the bird cage. I'll put my hand in the bird cage like this. Oh! So what's the matter? He goes, the back of his hand. Well, that's a big laugh from the studio audience. Then he says, it bit me.
When he first went to radio, apparently he did all his business and got huge laughs from the radio audience. But of course, I mean, he'd be doing all this sort of stuff and you know, and spitting on people, and no one at home would know what the hell was going on. But all they hear were these gales of laughter.
Well, it was difficult for Roy because Roy was didn't have a lot of schooling. He left school very young, and he was a slow reader. That's why radio was a bit of a turn back for Roy, because being a slow reader, it was difficult. But he made it. He made it just the same.
Dad would memorise his script. He'd get it a day before and have it down pat. Artists like Davy were very good reads, and they'd go on and just read it. But Dad knew the lines before he went on. So, I mean, I know one thing, I think they were having a slight little feud, and Dad accidentally on purpose knocked the script out of Davy's hand. Davy had it, and Dad went on with the script because he knew the script. That fixed him.
My father worked with Roy Rene particularly in Mackaki Mansions, I think, on radio for a long time. He played Orrible Irby and worked with Roy Rene and all those fantastic people.
There's his son, myself, who used to insult him, and then there was his brother-in-law, silly-looking Orrible Irby. Well, see, brother-in-laws you've always got to tolerate because, you know, they're like seeds, they come with a tomato. Then his neighbour next door, Lashwood, he hated him. See, is he able to get stuck into him? And then there's the little sissy garbage man that he's so far sorry for. And he's kind. And as he went from one character to the other, so his reaction, his way of treating them would be different. And some nights, little Spencer the garbage man would actually get bigger laughs than Roy. Unbelievable. I mean, people come up to Roy Rene in the fruit shop and say, oh, Mo, we heard the show last night about Khaki Man. That Spencer's funny. So thank you very much.
Dad, there's a young lady at the door. A young lady, the little Trevor. Pronounce her, Harry. Go on, open the door and pronounce her.
Miss Olivia Shakespeare.
No, don't move. Just stand there. Oh, but how wonderful. Just like the three witches from Macbeth.
Strike me lucky, did you hear that? She said I had clean breeches and bad breath.
It's the biggest radio unit Australia has ever seen. Never likely to see. My allocation was the Friday night show. My producer was Teddy Webster, and my comic was Roy Rene. Which was the worst, Teddy or Roy. But strangely enough, the writers, I never saw too much of Rene. I used to write the material and then run. As opposed to Freddie Parsons and Alex. Freddie was a very, very good writer as far as Rene was concerned. He'd worked with Rene in the 30s and slotted into the work of the unit very well.
Some stages, Dad was writing 3 of the top-rating variety comedy radio shows, weekly shows, and that would be for most of the year without a break. There was no, like television, there was no non-ratings era. You had 3 weeks off at Christmas, and that was it. The rest of the year, it was continuous.
Flying saucers are right in the news again. 7 years ago, Sydney Sound presented the very first pictures of flying saucers over Sydney. Now, in response to numerous requests, we represent them with the cooperation of that world-famous scientist, Professor Moses Mackaki. What are you doing there, Mo?
Just flying saucers.
He took me up to Lismore, really, for my health. I was very tired. I'd had an attack of epilepsy erysipelas, I can't say it, erysipelas, with the eye, and he took me away for the trip and collapsed. Had to go with heart, had to go into hospital, and we had to bring him back by plane.
During the last era when we didn't acknowledge that Uncle Roy was dying, but we knew it was going to happen and he was not going to be able to come back and work again. Ron Beck, who was the producer of the show, and Dad thought of all the ways that they could cheer him up most and make him believe that he had a future and he was going to get back there and he was going to make his mob laugh again. And they had to do it in a way that would convince him. So Dad had this idea to write the half-hour actor's choice.
He was waiting for television. That would be for me. But I knew he'd never make it. He was so very ill.
So he wrote it, he took it out to him. Uncle Roy read it very slowly and went over it. And he's got lovely pathos, pal. I could do wonders with this. But he knew that he would never live to do it. And then after a while, he stopped talking about it. It kept him going for a while.
Dad always thought that he was going to go back to radio, and he I can't do this. Okay.
I wonder what it's like to be an actor, to do just what you want to do and eat just what you like, and to keep a blinking flunky on the strut. To see those lovely belly girls, what dance in those revues, to take them out to supper, to die by look. If I could only live like that, I'd never get the blues. I think it mighty good to be alive.
This is what we call a Mo Award. And once a year here in Sydney, performers from all over Australia come to these awards. And if a performer is very good at what he does and is very lucky, he might even win an Australian Mo Award.
And I said, I have this idea. I think we should change the name, like the Oscars and like the Tonys. We should change it to the Mo Awards. And we should use this as an example of the statue that they should have, this picture that I have. And they all sat around the table looking at me like this. And inside I said, oh, shit, I've died here. These people are trying to tell me nicely to go mind my own goddamn business. And the next thing you know, a couple of them started going like this, and a couple of them have applauded, and they all stood up and said, that's fantastic, they said. And they adopted it as the Mo Awards.
Please welcome the son and the grandson of Roy Reens, Sam and Ben van der Sluis.
And the winner is the Four Kinsmen.
Hey, let's draw up the chairs.
And we're gonna sit around the kitchen table.
No! We're gonna dance around the Archibald fountain. Very clean, yeah.
Cut out the talk and Maui and give Mr. Latchwood a go.
Yes, I've got to get the atmosphere in the mood. Somebody please lower the lights.
You're the nearest, Herbie. You blow out the candle.
Well, there you are, Maui. The lights are out.
Oh, goodness, someone's holding my little hand.
Who's Spence?
Me. Mr. McSee, please don't shush in my face.
Well, take your face out of my shush.
If you're ready, Miss Becky, I'll get into touch with any person you like tonight.
Good. I'll have $50 worth of Jane Russell.
Oh, Miss Becky, would you like to go out with a movie star?
No. like to stay at home with the plumber's daughter. All pleasure. And stop napping, get on with your demonstration.
Well, as an example of my unique powers, I will attempt to receive a thought message from someone I've often heard you mention. Your brother Izzy in Palestine. Izzy's now coming through.
Izzy is he?
Yes, and here's the message he sends you. Although it's a long time since he's seen you, he's happily married with 6 children and owns a big Jerusalem hotel. The People's Palace, Palestine.
Frightfully lucky, Mr. Ashwood, that's marvellous.
No, McCacky, there's nothing so marvellous about that.
Oh, yes, there is. Izzy died when he was 3 days old.
That image of Mo keeping the nation laughing during some of the worst years of our century is a lingering image in my mind. It struck me that it was probably no accident that Mo did what he did, drawing on that rich tradition of Jewish humour, with its unique capacity to laugh in the face of the worst adversity. The film's producer is Donn Harley. She is herself an actress and comedienne. She told me that she regards Mo as a comic genius, who, if he had had the reach of modern media available to him in his time, would have conquered the world. Well, spanning the same period of our history, we move from one Australian legend to another, when next week we bring you a film about Fred Patterson, the only member of the Communist Party ever elected to an Australian Parliament. Join us then. Good night.